but we want to make sure we have a clean audio recording. So I'm going to go ahead and take a pause, and we'll probably start in about 20 seconds here. All right, well, welcome everybody to the firm of the future, moving from a professional service firm to a professional knowledge firm. I'm Ron Baker, and I'll be your presenter today. We'll spend the next hour and 15 minutes or so together. I am happy to take questions throughout the call. However, I don't think, because we have such a large audience today, I'm not sure I'll be able to get to all the questions, and if not, we'll find a way to take questions offline. I'll give you my contact information. But I just want to dive right in and talk about the firm of the future, from professional service firm to a professional knowledge firm. So let's start. One of the things that one line I really like is from this novel called The Leopard by an Italian novelist. He said, if we want things to stay as they are, things will have to change. That's a very interesting line because, as you know, in the accounting and the bookkeeping profession, there's a lot of change going on. Intuit is providing you lots of new software. They're moving you into the cloud. Things are changing, and they're changing very rapidly. Your customers are going mobile, so there's lots of different apps now in your ecosystem with your customers. So things are changing all around us, and they have been for quite a while. So we have to deal with change. However, we are still a profession, and we want to maintain our professionalism. And so with that in mind, I want to talk today about our business model, why we believe at VeraSage Institute we need to rethink and re-engineer our business model. It's because, yes, the world is changing. We know that for a fact. And I'm going to show to you that our business model that we're currently using today dates back to 1919. It's almost 100 years old. Now just ask yourself, has the world changed in 100 years? Has the world changed in 25 years, 15 years? The way you work, the way you service your customers expectations of you? Of course it has. And one of my points is that our business model has not kept pace with the change happening in the external environment. So that's why I really like this line. And we're also going to talk about what it means to be a professional. You know, that's a very sacred calling to consider yourself a professional. But what does it mean? So we're going to talk a little bit about that too, because I think that has direct consequences with how we structure our business model. So let me start off by quoting Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker was a kind of a management thinker. He was a seminal management thinker. I recommend almost all of his books are excellent. He's no longer with us, but he said, because its purpose is to create a customer, the business enterprise has two, and only these two, basic functions: marketing and innovation. Marketing and innovation produce results. All the rest are costs. Now, folks, that's a very provocative statement, that only marketing and innovation matter, especially to us accountants. I mean, I'm a CPA by education. I started my life in a Big 8 accounting firm back when there was a Big 8. And you know, we don't really necessarily deal that much. And here Peter Drucker is saying that it's the only two things that matter in a business, because those are the only two things that produce results outside of your organization. He called this the marketing concept. And the marketing concept is an extremely profound and brilliant insight. He said if you look at organizations, any type of organizations, a government, a church, a hospital, a school, or a business, or not-for-profit for that matter, all of the results of an organization take place outside of its four walls. So the result of a school, hopefully, is an educated child. The result of a hospital is a cured patient. The result of a church is a saved soul. Well, what's the result of an accounting firm or a professional firm? Well, it's a happy customer. It's a delighted customer who comes back, maybe purchases more of your services, and maybe is so happy they refer friends and colleagues and maybe family. All of those results take place outside of your four walls. In other words, the marketing concept deals with value to the customer, which is always external. The only thing you have inside your firms are costs, activities, efforts, inputs, none of which the customer cares about. The customer's only looking at the result that they're getting from the organization. They're not peering inside your organization and looking at internal things. And that was Drucker's central insight here. Again, this is called the marketing concept. And I think it's a very profound point because I don't think we've done a good enough job in the professions with innovation. If you look at just look at the innovation curve of a company like Intuit. I mean, they're constantly improving. They're constantly coming out with new software to make your life and our lives all easier, whether it's doing your taxes, doing a customer's books, whatever. I mean, they're an incredibly innovative company. Apple, Zappos, Amazon, all of these companies are incredibly innovative, and yet when you look at our profession as a whole, we tend to be on the laggard side of the innovation curve. And I think that's partly the reason for that is our business model. So let's talk about business models for a minute. And here's Andy Grove, the founder of Intel. Now, here's a man who knows something about changing the business model. Because if you know the story of Intel, you know they went from a memory chip company to a processing company darn near overnight. He basically started the company over and said, we can't make memory chips competitive with the Japanese anymore, so we're no longer in the memory chip business. So he basically wiped out $1 billion of revenue overnight and said, nope, we're not doing that anymore. We are now in the processing business. And of course, the rest is history. But what he said was disruptive threats come inherently not from new technology, but from new business models. Think about how disruptive Napster was to the music industry. And the music industry was totally caught off guard by Napster. And their response was to sue a bunch of kids for downloading and pirating music. They said, you're stealing. We have a crime wave on our hands. Well, when you have millions of people downloading billions of your product, you don't have a crime wave on your hands. You have a business model problem. And it took Apple and Steve Jobs basically to solve that business model. Notice the music industry didn't solve their business model problem. Apple did by setting up iTunes, by creating the iPod, by selling us all songs at $1 a pop basically, rather than buying a CD to get 20 songs you don't like for the one you do. They changed the business model. That was inherently disruptive. Look what Craigslist is doing to newspapers around the country, maybe even indeed around the world. It's throwing them into bankruptcy. It's certainly taken away their classified ad revenue, and it's changed the business models of a lot of newspapers, or they're not going to survive. Look at what Google Books is doing to publishing. Google Books wants to put every book ever published online so you can access it for free. Now, my publisher's John Wiley and Sons, major publishing company. I've got 5 books with them published. They sued Google over this. And you would think that I would agree as an author with Wiley's position in their lawsuit, but I don't. Because my business model is not to sell books. I make money in other ways. Now, my publisher's business model is to sell books, so Google's plans definitely disrupt them. Well, the publishers lost, and they reached a settlement with Google out of court, and someday you're going to be able to access every book ever published on Google for free. So what's that going to do to the publishing industry? And that's a business model change, folks, and that's highly, highly disruptive. And that was what Andy Grove's point was. So what is a business model? Let's define it. It's how your firm creates value for your customers and how you capture that value. So notice there's two components to a business model. It's you creating value and it's you capturing value. The capturing portion is your pricing. That's how a business captures a portion of the value through its pricing strategy. Now, our existing business model captures it mostly, although not dominantly, but mostly through the billable hour. The more time you spend on something, the higher price to the customer, and that's a form of capturing value. We think it's a suboptimal type of way to capture value, and that's what this webinar series is designed to do, to give you superior alternatives to the billable hour. But this is what your business model is, and the creating value is really, really important too, because you're trying to maximize the value that you create for your customer, because the more you can do that, the higher price you can charge. And it's something that your customer is intimately interested in as well. They want to get maximum value from your services. We want to provide maximum value to our customers. So it's the one area where our interests are completely aligned. If you think about price for a minute, of course, we want to charge a higher price, the customer wants a lower price. That's never going to change. That's been the way it's been since man emerged from the cave and started bartering for loincloths. The customer tries to drive down the price, and the seller tries to push back and tries to drive the price higher. So that's not going to change. The customer could care less about your costs, so the customer could care less about your efforts, your inputs, your hours. Again, they're looking at the output. And that's why I like to start with Peter Drucker's marketing concept and business models, because that's exactly what we're talking about here. How do you create value? And just to give you one more example of how disruptive business models are, I live in Northern California, so you tend to see these things on the road. But look at the Google driverless car. My mind can't even process how many business models this is going to either disrupt or literally destroy. What's it going to do to the taxi cab business? What's it going to do to the automobile industry, the airline industry, roadside hotels, pizza delivery, town car services? I mean, this is incredibly disruptive. The auto industry itself. If we become a nation of driverless cars, then there's going to be less need for cars, because you're going to just be able to get on your phone and call up a car whenever you need it. And it's just going to drive by and pick you up and take you wherever you want to go. Your teenagers aren't going to need a car anymore. I mean, this is incredibly disruptive to a whole lot of industries. And notice that it wasn't invented by the automobile companies. It was invented by a computer company. So Google has a history of disrupting and destroying lots of business models. And we're just going to continue to see them do this, and other companies. Even Uber, that is destroying taxi cab business models, is going to be disrupted by Google's driverless car unless they adapt and figure out a better business model. Because once this driverless car hits, it's going to be very, very disruptive. And it's here, folks. This isn't fiction. This car's here. It's already logged millions of miles, and according to Mercedes-Benz, they're going to start selling them in 2019. So this is here. This isn't, I'm not talking science fiction. This is a real-life business model example. So as this gentleman said, General Eric Shinseki, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in here when we're talking about business models. This is exactly what Andy Grove did when he went from a memory chip company to a processing company. He knew that if he stayed with memory chips, even though it was producing $1 billion in revenue, whatever it was, that he would become irrelevant. Intel would become irrelevant. They would be driven out of business. And one of the things he points out is, if you're going to be cannibalized, better to be cannibalized or better to dine with friends. And I think that's a really good point. In other words, his point was, unless you cannibalize yourself, then you're going to get cannibalized by a competitor. So that's why business models are so important, and that's why we believe it's so important to move from a professional service firm to a professional knowledge firm. Now, we draw a distinction between those two terms. When I joined the accounting profession in the 80s, I was taught that I worked in a professional service firm. And there's no doubt that we provide service to our customers. Every business provides service, even if they're selling just a product. Think of the service of an automobile company. Yeah, they're selling you something very tangible, but there's also a lot of services behind it. There's financing, there's dealer networks, there's service and warranties, and all of that's all service. So I'm not saying we're not in the service business, and I'm not saying that customer service isn't important. We're making a more kind of technical point that we're really a knowledge firm. The way we create wealth for our customers is through our knowledge as knowledge workers. And because we work in a knowledge economy, this is the #1 driver of wealth in today's world. So we think we have to change our mindset from a professional service firm to a professional knowledge firm, because knowledge firms operate differently. They're not service firms. They're certainly not factories. They're not industrial type firms. They operate under a completely different economic paradigm. And I don't think our business model has come to grips with this. Let me show you what I mean. If you think about the business model of the traditional accounting firm, and by the way, it's not just accounting firms. I could say this about law firms. I could say this about advertising agencies. I could say it about architectural firms or actuarial firms or engineering firms. But let's just stick with accounting firms. If an accounting firm wants to make revenue, it's got 3 levers at its disposal. It's got people hours, right? This is where we leverage people. We leverage time. We bill hours. This is what created the pyramid structure of the traditional accounting firm. This is how we got the Big 8. Of course, now the Big 4, but this is how, you know, the whole pyramid structure came about. We're leveraging people, right? You have lots of staff, and you have fewer managers, and you have even fewer partners, the traditional pyramid structure, and we're leveraging time. And then we're multiplying the people hours by their efficiency. We're tracking things like billable hours, realization rates, utilization rates. You pick up any survey of the accounting profession anywhere in this world, and you're going to see billable hours, realization, utilization, profit per partner, all of these metrics that are all time-based for the most part. And folks, they all date back to the 1880s. They were created for in an industrial era that we no longer operate in. In other words, I'm saying that they're irrelevant for knowledge workers, because measuring the efficiency of a factory worker and measuring the efficiency of an accountant are 2 entirely different things. You cannot use the same methods for the one as to the other. You can't. The work is different, the way of the work is different, and where the work originates from is completely different. Knowledge work is the process of the mind. I can't go into an R&D lab in the morning and say, hey, everybody, have a great idea by 8 a.m. That's not how innovation and ideation and creativity happen. It doesn't happen on a clock. It doesn't happen on a schedule. Like, it doesn't move to the rhythms and cadences of an assembly line. So these efficiency metrics that we all use are totally outdated for a knowledge economy. And then the third lever is everybody's hourly rate. Everybody's got an hourly rate. That rate goes up every year because it's a form of cost plus pricing, right? We're taking what we pay somebody, sometimes multiplying it by 3, whatever, and we're determining their hourly rate. So the more we pay them, the higher their hourly rate goes. But that has nothing to do with value created for the customer. So if you look at this business model, and this is what we call the firm of the past, as opposed to, say, the firm of the future. If you look at this business model, you can see the common denominator that runs through it is time. Everything here is denominated in time. In fact, if you had to sum up this business model, it would be we sell time. And indeed, if you look at the internal metrics and you look at what firms track inside, even if you looked at their engagement letters with their customers, somebody from Mars would say, yeah, this is selling time, right? They've got their hourly rate quoted, blah, blah, blah. But folks, there's not a customer alive that buys time. None of us buys time as a consumer. Take off your professional hat for a minute, put on your consumer hat. Where do you buy time? Do you buy the time of your plumber, your doctor, your gardener? No, you buy a result. You buy an outcome. That's what's important. It's not the time, it's the outcome that we're buying. So there's a fundamental marketing problem here if we're caught in a business model that says we sell time. And that fundamental problem is, how do you sell something to somebody if that's not what they think they're buying? It's really a big marketing problem because we talk about time, we measure time, we even put our prices in terms of time, and yet the customer doesn't care about our time. Again, there's not a customer alive that buys time. So we think there's many problems with this business model. But let me just point out another one, which is the whole people hours, this idea that we can leverage time. You can't leverage time. Time is not value to the customer, and time is not even really a cost to your firm. Time is a constraint. Time is a constraint, and every mortal human being and every organization is subject to the constraint of time. Apple's got the same time constraints as we do. Intuit has the same time constraints as we do. Google has the same time constraints. So it's a constant. So a constant can't be part of your business model. To be part of your business model, it needs to be something that you can control. And time is nothing that any of us can manage. You can't manage time. That's a complete misnomer. You can manage the energy that you put into something, but time just passes. And time is very relative, as Einstein taught us. So it's not a good component to think about leveraging. So when you look at this business model, let me just give you the historical antecedent of it. Here's the gentleman responsible for the business model you just looked at. His name is Reginald Heber Smith. He was a lawyer, and he was the first person that we know of who simultaneously introduced both the billable hour and the timesheet in his law firm in 1919. That's almost 100 years ago. And my question is, can we risk having a business model that's almost 100 years old when we know the world has changed, even dramatically, within the last 15 years? I mean, just roll the clock back 15 years and ask yourself, did you ever think you'd be Googling something, right? I mean, and now we rely on Google probably every single day. So definitely the world has changed, and yet we're trapped. It's kind of like an intellectual embargo. We're trapped in this old business model. And one of the problems with it is it's very similar to when a friend or a loved one has a baby. You want to see pictures of the baby. You don't want to hear about the labor pains. But think about our business model for a minute. Not only do we measure and track the labor pains in 6-minute contractions, we bill for them in 6-minute contractions. All the while, the customer cares about the baby. So by focusing on the billable hours, by focusing on the timesheet, we are not focusing on the outcome. We're focusing on the inputs, the efforts, the hours, none of which the customer cares about. And I think it's holding our profession back because knowledge work is different. You can come up with a brilliant idea in the shower or in the car commuting to work that saves your customer millions of dollars maybe, or hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe a tax strategy, for example. Is it worth just the amount of time it took you to come up with that idea? That's insane. That's like arguing that the vaccine that Jonas Salk invented, the polio vaccine, is only worth the value to the extent that of the time it took him to develop it. That's nonsense. The value of that polio vaccine is that it eradicated all this misery and suffering basically almost from the face of the earth. It's worth far more than the amount of time that you could put on an hourly rate and the time to develop that vaccine. So I'm basically saying our business model is focusing on the wrong thing. The billable hour regime, the timesheet regime, again, almost 100 years old, forces us to focus on the wrong thing. And we need to get back to focusing on value, to focusing on results, to focusing on outcomes. And that's what we're trying to do with the firm of the future. So in order to build a better business model, and let me just preface this by saying, I am not saying there's only one type of business model in the future for accounting firms. There's room for hundreds of thousands of different types of business models. And that's the beauty of a free market economy. But what I am saying is some of the fundamentals of that business model, whatever it might be, are going to have to be based on something else other than time. Because time is not a good way to base a business model on, because it limits our income right out of the gate. We only have so much time. And so one of the reasons that Bill Gates' bank account looks a little bit different than the rest of us is because Bill Gates was never captured by the idea that Microsoft sold time. He didn't price based on time. He didn't have that as a pricing or a value constraint. Yes, he had time as a constraint to put out his products and all of that, but he didn't use it to price or to determine value like we do. And since that's the heart of what it means to have a business model, I think we have to seriously think about it. So I'm going to make 4 assertions to you in order to design what we think is a better business model. Now, I'm going to make these 4 assertions, and I don't expect you to accept them at face value. I want you to subject them to your own experience, to your own wisdom, to your own knowledge, and you can challenge them. My goal is not to have you think like me, but to think with me. But think you must, because I think these 4 assertions have empirical evidence to back them up, and I think I can prove every one of them. But I still want you to wrestle with them and go through your own thought process. So here's my first assertion. Growth without profit is perilous. How many of you have ever seen a business, maybe some of your customers over the years, seen a business grow into bankruptcy? They expanded too fast, maybe they took on too much debt, maybe they just didn't have enough capacity and their customer service started to slip, whatever. Growth without profit is perilous. We see this all the time. The business pages are filled with companies that grew so fast they grew into bankruptcy. And I, like Peter Drucker, define profit as the price we pay for tomorrow. Profit is what enables us to invest in R&D. It enables us to innovate. It enables us to come up with new business models and try new services so we can add even more value to our customers over their entire lifetime. And just to back this up, because I'm an empiricist, everything I say, I try and ground it in empirical evidence and in empirical reality. There's a fantastic little book on this very point called The Myth of Market Share. And it's written by a guy named Richard Miniter. It's a very small little book. I think it's about 100 pages, and it's very well written. And even though it's a little bit dated, what he's basically arguing here is that growth for the sake of growth is the fool's gold of business. You know, market share, revenue is vanity, but profit is sanity. And, you know, Apple is a great example of this. Apple does not pursue market share. It never has. In its entire operating history, Apple could care less about market share. And if you look at, say, smartphones in the United States, Apple might have, I don't know, I think it's around 30% of market share in the smartphone market. Android certainly came in and took a big chunk away from them when Google started Android. But do you know what percentage of the profits in the iPhone industry that Apple earns? It's something like 90%. So would you rather have a 30% market share with 90% of the industry profits, or would you rather have a 60% market share with 10% of the industry profits? In other words, what I'm saying to you is that equation of revenue, that any dollar is a good dollar, any customer is a good customer, any billable hour is a good billable hour is deeply flawed. Growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of the cancer cell. It's not the ideology of a profitable, sustainable business. If you look at some of the most profitable car companies in the world, they do not have anywhere near the largest market share. Exhibit A would be Porsche, Exhibit B would be BMW. These companies are incredibly profitable, but they have very small market shares. But what they do have is a very focused strategy and a very loyal customer following. So please don't fall into the trap of thinking that any customer is a good customer, any dollar is a good dollar. That's not true. That's not true at all. If the customer's a wrong fit, if you don't have a clear purpose in your firm, if you don't have a clear strategy, then growth for the sake of growth is just the ideology of the cancer cell. It has nothing to do with profit. Don't confuse being big with being profitable. So that would be my first assertion. And I've actually coined a law about this. It's called Baker's Law, and that is that bad customers drive out good customers. And I think this is very, very true. This is very, very true. Because we spend so much time with the toxic customers or the people who complain or who don't appreciate our value. And I think that diverts our attention and our emotional capacity from serving our better customers. So by having some bad customers in your firm, you're actually putting at risk your best customers. And I think that's a big problem. And I'd rather see you get rid of the bad customers and focus more time and energy on your best customers who already love you, who probably want you to do more for them, and who are probably much less price sensitive than these complainers. So what we're seeing around the world, and again, I can tell you this empirically, firms with less customers have more profitability. Less customers equals more profitability. I know that's a very counterintuitive point, but it's an empirical fact of life, not only in the professional world, but in almost every business. And again, Apple, Nordstrom, BMW, Porsche, these would be the exhibits. These are incredibly profitable companies, but they don't have commanding market share, and that's not their goal. So bad customers drive out good customers. I think that's a really important call. The second assertion I'm going to make to you from growth without profit is perilous. The second assertion is that non-rival assets are more leverageable than rival assets. Okay? So now these are economic terms. So what they mean is a rival asset, think of a bottled water. A bottled water is a rival asset. If I'm drinking it, you can't be drinking it. As I drink more of it, it suffers from diminishing returns. If I drink all of it, you can't have any of it. But the important point is, if I'm drinking it, you can't be drinking it at the same time. It can only be in one place at one time. That's what economics means by rival asset. Now, a non-rival asset is knowledge or ideas. Knowledge or ideas can be more than one place at one time. If I give you knowledge today, or I give you ideas, you can take it, you can tweak it, maybe even make it better, and use it for your firm to add wealth to your customers. But guess what? I still have it. When I transferred my idea or my knowledge to you, I didn't lose it. I kept it. And now you have it. And now you might improve upon it. It might find its way back to me someday through a conversation or a book or something like that. So knowledge grows. It's not subject to diminishing returns like a physical rival asset. It actually grows. They call this knowledge accretion. This is how we become wealthier as a society, through knowledge. So if you think about leveraging something in a business model, if you were to start a business from scratch, I don't care what type of business, but let's stick with an accounting firm. Would you rather leverage a rival asset or a non-rival asset? Well, ask yourself, what does Google leverage? What does Craigslist leverage? Well, they obviously leverage non-rival assets, right? Craigslist is not subject to any physical constraints in the World Wide Web. So it's much more leverageable to create a non-rival asset business model. Well, because I believe accountants are knowledge workers, We are in the knowledge business, and knowledge is a non-rival asset. Folks, ask yourself, what's a billable hour? A billable hour is a rival asset. The hour that we're going to spend on this call, you can't be billing a customer, at least not effectively, because none of us can multitask. The human brain is not designed to multitask, especially knowledge work. I don't want my surgeon multitasking. I don't want him checking his email while he's doing his heart surgery on me. So, you know, a billable hour is it's a rival asset. Well, that's an insane way to start a business model, because right out of the gate, we're limiting ourselves to how much money we can earn. A couple of ways to think about this. One, this is from Thomas Sowell, who's a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution in Palo Alto, California. He says in his book, Knowledge and Decisions, after all, the caveman had the same natural resources at their disposal as we have today. And the difference between their standard of living and ours is a difference between the knowledge they could bring to bear on those resources and the knowledge used today. That's a very interesting thing to think about, that the caveman had all the same natural resources we do. They had silicon, they had oil, but they didn't have the knowledge of what to do with these things, so there wasn't any value. So it's knowledge that is the ultimate source of wealth, and I would say creativity as well, and imagination. I mean, oil under the ground in the 1840s was a complete nuisance. It wasn't until man invented the combustion engine that oil became valuable. And if we ever find a replacement for oil, its value is going to go back to zero. The other way to think about this is the way Peter Drucker wrote about it. He said, we know the source of wealth is something specifically human, knowledge. If we apply knowledge to tasks that we already know how to do, we call it productivity. This is Intuit helping you with QuickBooks Online, get in the cloud, get your clients in the cloud. So you already know how to do this stuff. Now you're just doing it faster. So that's efficiency, that's productivity. But he says, if we apply knowledge to tasks that are new and different, we call it innovation. Only knowledge allows us to achieve these two goals. Again, it's all about knowledge. Knowledge is the way that your firm creates wealth. Where is that knowledge held? Who owns it? This is what makes a knowledge economy different than a service economy or an industrial economy or an agrarian society or a hunter-gatherer society. Let me show you who owns the wealth in at least the developed world. The World Bank did two studies, 2006 and 2010. You can get these online for free. They're massive studies. But basically, let me just give you the conclusion from the second one here, the changing wealth of nations. In the G20 countries, that's the developed world, you know, the United States and Canada and Europe and all of that, 80% of the world's wealth in the G20 countries, 80% resides in human capital. That's the gray stuff in between your ears. And folks, you own it. You own it. Your firm does not own the human capital of your employees. You rent it. So your knowledge workers own the means of production in your firm. In other words, your workers, your human capital, is 80% of your firm's ability to create wealth for your customers. And you don't own those assets. They own them. That's what makes a knowledge firm different than a service firm or an industrial firm. Think about if you used to work for Henry Ford back in the turn of the last century. You walked into his plant, you worked to the rhythms and cadences of his assembly line. That assembly line was your master. You had to be there when the car came and do whatever it was you were doing. But a knowledge organization, and by the way, Henry Ford owned the means of production. He owned the property, the plant, and the equipment. Today, the knowledge worker owns the means of production. So they come into your office and everything's in their head. Yes, you have systems. Yes, you have processes, and that's all part of your intellectual capital as well. It's called structural capital. But it's a small proportion of the value added. The real value is in human capital, and that's in your employee's head, and they own it. You don't. So knowledge firms are basically assetless organizations. Look at Google. What do they have? Some buildings, some ping pong tables, some desks, some computers. They don't have a lot of physical assets, not even close relative to their market capitalization value, but yet they have incredible human capital, and they don't own it. It's the same in accounting. You know, the old joke was, in the industrial era, you could bring your coffee to the office. The new joke in the knowledge era is you can bring your office to the coffee. Every one of us could sit here in a Starbucks and do a full day's work. I could be doing this webinar from a Starbucks, although it'd probably piss off people around me. But the point is, you're not tied to a physical location like we were in Henry Ford's day. You can work from anywhere, and especially with the cloud and all these other types of apps and mobile devices, you're not tied to a physical location anymore. This is another thing that makes the knowledge economy completely different than the service economy. So I think this is a really important point, that 80% of your firm's wealth creating ability is not owned by your firm. It's in the heads of your people. And they're basically volunteers. Whether or not they come back in the elevator the next morning is completely up to them. And that's going to be determined by what their economic reward is and how well they're treated as a human being. And if they don't feel they're getting good return on those two things, they're going to take their human capital and they're going to invest it somewhere else. And that means the economic power has shifted to the workers. It's actually shifted to the workers. Knowledge organizations need the knowledge workers more than the knowledge workers need the organizations. And you're starting to see this across the board in the on-demand economy. There's some 53 million Americans that work in the on-demand economy. They're Uber drivers. They work for these various apps where you can get things, somebody walk your dog, do handy jobs around your house, whatever. It's 53 million. These are like little entrepreneurs and little business owners that are doing their own thing on their own time in their own way with the help of these software companies like Uber to monetize it. So the business models are constantly being changed. But I think it's really important to understand that the billable hour is a rival asset and knowledge is a non-rival asset. And we're all knowledge workers. And you can sell your knowledge in many different ways than 1 hour at a time. You can have knowledge out there in the form of webinars, seminars, books, white papers, all sorts of different ways to disseminate knowledge, which opens up a plethora of opportunity for you to monetize and capture the value from that knowledge. The third assertion I'll make to you is that effectiveness is what creates a competitive advantage. Efficiency is a table stake. Now, I have to be very careful here, and let me define this very specifically. Efficiency is always a ratio, outputs divided by inputs. This is how we get realization rates and utilization rates, right? These are efficiency metrics. They're a ratio. What's the total hours I worked? What's the billable hours that I actually collected? That would be an example of a ratio, right? You divide one into the other and you get a ratio. That's efficiency. Effectiveness is completely different. Effectiveness is doing the right thing. And we can be efficient at doing the wrong things. And there's nothing more wasteful or useless than being efficient at doing the wrong thing. Let me give you an example. Buggy whip manufacturers. Buggy whip manufacturers were at the apogee of their efficiency before the automobile took them out. It didn't matter how efficient the buggy whip manufacturers were once the combustion engine came on the scene. The new technology drove it out because it was much more effective. So the goal in business is not to be efficient, because you can be efficient at doing the wrong things. And in fact, the more emphasis you put on efficiency, I think the less customer-centric you become. Let me give you some examples of this. If you look at a Nordstrom department store, go into a Nordstrom. What's the thing that strikes you about Nordstrom? Well, first off, they don't have a rat maze, right? You can see from one side of the store to the other, so they don't set up their merchandise like you have to go through a habit trail, which, by the way, lowers their efficiency rating of sales per square foot because they don't have as much merchandise. Their sales per square foot is lower. They have pianos in their store that serenade both their customers and their employees. That's not very efficient. Now you've got to hire a musician, you've got to rent or buy a baby grand piano, you got to give precious floor space over to that piano. It's not efficient at all. In fact, it lowers your efficiency metrics. It is, however, quite effective at creating a competitive differentiation. When you're in a Nordstrom, you know you're not in a Macy's or Kohl's or some other type of department store. There's a distinct and unique feel to a Nordstrom. Part of it is the ambiance from that piano, and that piano is not efficient. So many times we're making a trade-off between efficiency and effectiveness. And in a knowledge organization, I want you to be effective more than I want you to be efficient. I will suffer through deliberate inefficiency to be more effective. Let me give you some examples. If you look at any great city in the world, look at their bridges. I just picked the Golden Gate because I'm in Northern California, so this is in my backyard. But I could have put the Sydney Harbor Bridge up here, could have put the London Bridge, whatever bridge is your favorite. And there's lots of beautiful bridges. But think about it. The military can build a bridge, and it can be much cheaper, and it can carry just as much weight, and they can raise it up so ships can come in under it. So why do cities go to this trouble of expending all this money on an elaborate structure like the Golden Gate and all the upkeep that it requires? Is not very efficient. From a simple output-input relationship, a military bridge would be far more efficient, be faster to make, less maintenance, all of that. But we don't do it because humans don't like efficiency. I don't want an efficient marriage. I don't even know what that means. It kind of scares me. We want aesthetic beauty. The Golden Gate is an effective bridge. It's not very efficient. It has to be painted all the time, but it is very effective. It's an icon. It brings people around the world to the city. For the very reason, I think, because it's not efficient. Art is not efficient. And I think what we do is art. So this constant quest for efficiency, I think, is misguided. You're getting more efficient with all of the software that Intuit's providing and everything else. You're going to get more efficient just because of the learning curve of mankind, right? The surgeon's going to be more efficient doing his 100th operation than his first 10. But that's not a competitive advantage. You know why? Because your competitors can be in the cloud too, and they're also climbing down the efficiency curve. So why compete on efficiency? It's a table stake. It's the minimum you need to be in the game, but it's not a competitive advantage. Let me give you one other problem with efficiency. And this kind of relates to the billable hour and the timesheet. If you wanted to build a world-class automobile and you did your homework and you said, well, I think the best engine comes from a Ferrari, and I think the best brakes come from a Porsche, and I think, I don't know, the best handling comes from BMW, and something else comes from the Lamborghini. I mean, pick your cars for these 10,000 parts that make up a car. If you bought the best part from every car and assembled it in your garage, would you have a world-class automobile? No, you'd have a very expensive piece of junk, because each one of these cars in and of itself is an interdependent system, like the human body. You can't pick the best from each and build a better person. It doesn't work that way with an interdependent system. Your firm is an interdependent system. And just like the human body, sometimes a surgeon has to remove an organ to make you healthy. In other words, he has to reduce the efficiency of your body somewhere to make the whole healthier overall. It's the same thing with a knowledge firm, or indeed any organization. Sometimes you have to be less efficient to be more effective. The Nordstrom piano player is a great example of that. Let me give you another one. Disney. When Disney made Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, that wasn't very efficient. He could have made Snow White and the Three Dwarfs. He could have cut out 4 dwarfs. Would have been much faster for his animators to draw. There would have been less drawings. He could have got the movie in the theater quicker, started making money quicker. But he didn't do it because Snow White and the Three Dwarfs is efficient, but it's not very effective. It's not very effective. And so knowledge organizations need to focus on effectiveness because they're interdependent systems. You have to look at the effectiveness of the whole, not the sum of each part. You can't break it down that way. That's the problem with the billable hour. Breaking it down and thinking, if we're efficient with every single hour, then we're going to be more effective as a whole. That's complete nonsense. That's complete nonsense. A system does not operate that way. A system in many ways has to be less efficient in certain parts of it to be more effective as a whole. So the power is really with the specialist, not the generalist. I want an effective heart surgeon, right? Not an efficient one. By the way, this isn't really part of the conversation today, but it's part of your business model. I would highly recommend that you think about specialization. Specialists can charge highest prices. They have the largest geographical market. We'll all hop on a plane and fly to Rochester, Minnesota to go to the Mayo Clinic to go talk to a specialist, a brain surgeon, an oncologist. You're not going to do that to go get a general practitioner. You're going to go on Google and search your zip code. So if you're a specialist, you're getting more sophisticated customers from a larger geographical area, and you have fewest competitors. So another way to think about efficiency, and just I'm just going to use one example from this, but you know, the things that we're going to be talking about in this webinar series is pricing on purpose, the last one here. Pricing on purpose, pricing the customer, is not very efficient. It's not as efficient when you compare it to doing timesheets, spitting out bills. However, it's far more effective. It's more effective in terms of building a relationship with your customer, and it's far more effective at capturing value that you create, which means it's more profitable. Yes, it's less efficient in the short run, but it's more profitable in the long run. But let me give you another thing that we've kind of talked about it with Nordstrom, but the total quality service. If you go into a Ritz-Carlton and you ask a Ritz-Carlton employee, where's this particular ballroom? They won't just pull out a map and draw a circle and say, well, you're here in the lobby and go down here and get on the elevator and go down the escalator. They'll actually escort you there. Now, folks, that's not very efficient. It's much more efficient to draw you a map and just send you on your way and move on to the next guest. But if you ask a Ritz-Carlton employee where the ballroom is, they'll escort you there and they'll have a conversation. As a human being, that's far more effective. And that's why Ritz-Carlton can charge a higher price, and that's why they create a better customer experience, because they're less efficient. So please don't get caught in the trap that everything's about efficiency. It's not. It's about human relationships. This is a human relationship business, and humans repel from efficiency. They want that human touch. They want that extra time. They want your empathy, your sympathy, your caring, your ear. All of that's very inefficient. Human relationships are completely inefficient. They are, however, the purpose of our business, right, to help other people. So the other thing is, so let me give you the last one here. The fourth assertion I'm going to make is value pricing is superior to hourly billing for capturing value. Hourly billing is a form of cost plus pricing, right? We take our costs, we add a profit wish, a desired profit level, we divide it by the number of hours we think we can bill across our entire firm. Doesn't matter if you have employees or you're just a solo, number of hours you think you can bill, and that sets our hourly rate. Well, the problem with that formula is it doesn't take into account value to the customer. So if you think about pricing for value, if you think about determining the value to your customer and pricing the customer and not the service, which is what we're going to talk about in the next 3 webinars, it's actually pricing the customer and not the service, then you're going to find that that's superior to hourly billing in terms of your profitability. Again, let me back this up with empirical evidence. Here are 2 studies done by 2 consulting houses. One is McKinsey, one is A.T. Kearney. And this is actually done for manufacturing companies, not accounting firms, manufacturing companies. And what this graph shows in these 2 studies is if you had a 1% change, let me go back, sorry. If you had a 1% change in these various things, this graph shows the impact on your operating profit, on your bottom line essentially. So if you cut fixed costs by 1%, which isn't that hard to do if you think about it, you'll get a 1.5 to 2.7% jump in profit, in bottom line profit. If you increase your revenue, in other words, go out and get a new customer, land a new customer, you'll increase your bottom line profit by 2.5 to 3.7%. If you cut your variable costs, you'll increase by 4.6 to 7.3. Again, this is manufacturers. But look what happens when you increase your pricing by 1% with no change in demand. You get a 7.1 to 11% jump, and some studies show even higher. Folks, that's enormous. So where should you concentrate your limited attention as a firm owner or as a firm leader? You should focus on pricing, because that's where the money is. A 1% change in pricing can create that big of a swing in your profit. We can't do much with fixed costs in our firm. What are you going to do? Pay your people less? You're going to rent cheaper buildings? I guess you could cut your fixed costs, but there's not a lot of room. Yeah, you can go out and get new customers, and I'm all for it. But if you bring those customers in at the wrong price, you're just adding layers of mediocrity into your firm. We don't have many variable costs in a professional firm. Most of our costs are fixed. So the real opportunity here is in pricing. We're talking about a 1% change. We're talking about going from $100 to $101. If you set a 5% increase, you'd get to multiply these numbers by 5. So you'd get a 55% jump potentially in profit. To compute your own 1% windfall, that's what pricers call this, by the way, the 1% windfall, simply take 1% of your revenue and divide it by your profit. And that's your 1% windfall. Now, if you follow some of the strategies that I'm going to lay out in the next 3 webinars, I believe you can increase your pricing power by 10, 20, 30, 50, maybe even 100%. You start plugging in these numbers to your own formula in your own firm, and you can see there's nothing that you could do to drive profit more than pricing. Nothing. Don't worry about efficiency. Don't worry about cost cutting. Worry about pricing, because that's where the money is. That's where you can really have a dramatic impact on your bottom line. And that's what this series of webinars is designed to do. So the other thing I just want to say about pricing is the default purpose of marketing is not to increase sales. It's to increase profits. Pricing is to drive profit. And I don't mean just profit for you, but also profit for your customer, because we're going to increase value to the customer, which is going to increase their profit as well. Yes, the customer does make a profit. Not only the seller makes a profit, the customer makes a profit too, and I'm going to show that to you in our next webinar. The other thing that pricers love to say is you innovate for growth, but you price for profit. And let me just back up the pricing idea with the sage from Omaha, Warren Buffett, a man who knows a little something about valuing companies. He said a couple years ago in an interview, the single most important decision, read that again, the single most important decision in evaluating a business is pricing power. If you've got the power to raise prices without losing business to a competitor, you have a very good business. And if you have to have a prayer session before raising the price by 10%, then you've got a terrible business. Now, if you look at the companies that Warren invests in, they all have enormous pricing power. Take Coca-Cola, for example. Could Coca-Cola raise its price by 10%? Sure they could. Could Apple? Sure they could. Could BlackBerry? Probably not, right? Good pricing isn't going to save a bad business model. And BlackBerry didn't keep up with innovation. So no amount of good pricing is going to save BlackBerry. You still have to have something of value. But this is a very important point that Buffett is making here, that it's really pricing power that drives profit. And the way you obtain pricing power is you create enormous value for your customers. This is why Apple can command such a premium. I mean, I'm sitting here working on an Apple desktop that I paid, I don't know, $3,600 for. I could have bought a Lenovo, an HP, some other brand for probably a fifth of that price. And yet, I continue to pay Apple an enormous premium for every product I buy. Why? What makes people do that? If you can tap into those same things in your firm, and you can, there's lots of strategies we're going to talk about to increase your value, talking here about creating value, and then if you create incredible value, it's much easier to capture a fair share of it from your customers through better pricing. So if you look at these 4 assertions, these are my 4 assertions to you, and if you go where this logic takes you, then I think the firm of the future looks more like this. Rather than looking at revenue, we're going to start with profit. And what I mean here, folks, is profit to the customer. And I'm talking about the customer's lifetime profit, not just 1 year, but their entire lifetime. What's the lifetime value of a customer to your firm, and how can you increase the customer's profit over their lifetime? That's what smart companies look at. They look at the lifetime value of the company to the customer, not the other way around. Apple's continuously trying to figure out how can we add more value over our customer's lifetime. And that's how they come up with products like the iPhone and the iPad and the iWatch and all these other things they're probably going to come out with in the future, because they're constantly trying to add more profit to us. And then you're multiplying that. The three components are intellectual capital, the human capital, the social capital, and the structural capital. We didn't talk about those other two so much, but they're all part of your firm's knowledge base. And that's really what you're leveraging. You're not leveraging time. You're not leveraging people. You're leveraging knowledge. And knowledge is much more leverageable than hours. And then you're multiplying that by effectiveness, not efficiency, effectiveness. And you're multiplying that by a value price. This business model, if you had to sum it up, you would say our customers buy outcomes. And let me just say one more thing, and then I'll try and look at some questions. I haven't been looking at the question box, but let me just say something is about being a professional. And that is, what's different about a professional from other types of workers? You know, we think of ourselves as professionals. We call ourselves a profession, whether you're a CPA, an accountant, a bookkeeper, whatever. So what is it that's different about a professional from another type of worker? Well, here's a big difference. A professional is somebody who takes responsibility for producing an outcome, not delivering a series of tasks, but producing an outcome. Let me give you a thought experiment. If you were in the market for a landscaper for your home, somebody to mow, weed, take care of the roses and your bushes and that type of thing in your tree, and you got 3 bids. The first landscaping company came to you and they said, we'll do all of that and anything else you ask us to do in your yard for $40 an hour. So they're focusing on inputs, right? They're pricing based on inputs, $40 an hour. The second landscaper says, oh, no, we'll come in, we'll do all that and anything else you tell us to do, that's within the scope, and we'll do that at a fixed price of $100 a month. The third landscaper, however, comes by, has a conversation with you, looks at your yard and says, we'll do everything that is required to give you the best curbside appeal in the neighborhood. When we see your tree needs trimming, we'll trim it. If we see a rose bush died, we'll replace it. We don't want you to have to think about this at all. You obviously don't like to do gardening. That's why you're hiring a landscaper in the first place. So we want to take the entire burden off of you, and you can rest assured that you will have the best curbside appeal in the neighborhood. Now, folks, which landscaper are you going to hire, and which one would you be willing to pay the highest price to? Obviously, the one focused on the outcome, the curbside appeal. That's what our profession needs to do. We need to focus on the outcome, not a series of deliverables, not a series of tasks, the entire holistic outcome. That's what we need to price for, and that's what we need to manage with the customer. So we need to understand what it is, what outcome they define as success. What outcome do they want? Because that's what we are professionally responsible for delivering, an outcome, not just doing a series of tasks. That is actually unprofessional. And that's one of my main arguments against the billable hour and the timesheet. It takes everything and breaks it down into a 6-minute, 10-minute task. That's not what a professional is about. You're there to take responsibility for an entire outcome, whether it's getting the books up and running, transferring them to the cloud, whatever it is, out the audit, tax, I don't care what it is. You're responsible for the outcome. If you went to a LASIK surgeon, that surgeon would be responsible for producing the best clinical eyesight he could. And if he had to see you 10 times, 20 times, if he had to put you under the laser 30 more times to get to the best clinical outcome humanly possible, that's his duty. And that needs to be built into his price. And he can't nickel and dime you for those follow-up visits because he's trying to get you to an outcome. That's what he's priced for. And so we need to get better at pricing for outcomes and focusing on outcomes and understanding what those are, because that's what our customer buys. They don't buy hours. They don't buy efforts. They don't buy activities. They buy outcomes. So I will leave you. I'll try and take a look at these questions. Donna, if you've seen any questions and have some at the tip of your fingers, you can join in here. In an age in which almost everything can be learned by our clients from the internet, how can our knowledge be substantially greater than theirs? That's a great question, John Rosenberg. In an age in which almost everything can be learned by our clients from the internet, how can our knowledge be substantially greater than theirs? John, because they don't have your years of experience. I can go on to Google or I can go on to WebMD and I can learn a lot about a specific medical affliction. I can learn a lot about a drug. I can learn a lot about clinical trials. If I'm willing to read, I can get that knowledge. What I don't have is my doctor's wisdom. I don't have that tacit knowledge, that deep expertise. I can read Tiger Woods' books on how to golf off the internet for free probably. But does that mean I'm going to be able to golf like Tiger Woods? Not a chance. Why? Because I don't have the tacit knowledge. And it's the tacit knowledge, it's the experience, it's the wisdom, it's your ability to synthesize that makes you valuable, to come up with strategies specifically for your customers to help them solve problems or achieve their goals. That's what makes you valuable as a professional. Otherwise, folks, why would we even exist? If customers could do everything on their own, why would we be needed? We're obviously needed because we have deep expertise, just like your doctor, just like your dentist, just like your auto mechanic. Yeah, I can go on to Acura's website and figure out how to work on my Acura. Does that mean I'm going to try it? No, I'd botch it up like you wouldn't believe. It'd be like setting your own broken leg. You have the tacit knowledge, so you are incredibly valuable. And let's see. Let me go through some other of these questions. A lot of companies you are mentioning don't make a lot of sense. Many of these businesses aren't charging by the hour because they have another driver, product, the CPAs. We don't have that luxury. I'm not saying that you don't have a good idea or an answer. I just think these are bad comparisons. That's come from Sam, is it Fiedler? Fiedler. Well, Sam, the fact of the matter is these companies both offer product and a service. A car company couldn't exist without service, even though they sell a very tangible product, right? They also have warranties. They have financing. You have a lot of things to sell, and you can productize your services. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about in these webinars. I'm going to suggest that you offer 3 packages to your customer, much like, think about American Express. They offer you a green card, a gold card, a platinum card. Now, American Express is a service company, and yet they've productized their offering. I think you can do the same thing, and you can do it in very innovative ways that will capture more value. So, look, I understand what you're saying, but the fact of the matter is everything I'm telling you is grounded in 2 schools of theory, marketing and economics. And there's no special law of supply and demand for accountants. We are subject to, our customers are subject to the same laws of supply and demand, the same laws of behavioral psychology, behavioral economics, which is what I draw from for all of my work. And there are ways to differentiate yourself and to be more like Apple than, say, BlackBerry. You can do that in a CPA firm. You can do it in a professional firm. So we'll talk more about that in the seminars. Yeah, okay. Let's see. Walmart, Intuit. Walmart, I guess, Sam, you were talking about Walmart in terms of going for market share, probably. Walmart didn't start out with the goal of market share. Walmart started out to save people the most money. Because they offered a superior value proposition, they grew into market share. I'm not arguing that market share in itself is bad, but market share is an effect. It's not a cause. It's an effect. It's not a cause of a great business. So there's a big difference there. Again, if you read that book, The Market Share Myth, you'll get more on that. Okay, I love Nordstrom Macy's example. Okay, folks, I'm trying to go through all your questions here. can't see anything else. So let me just make, I know we're running up against time here. We will talk about the other webinars. Let me give you an idea of what the other webinars are going to contain. The next webinar we're going to talk about is the introduction to the value conversation. I'm going to give you an 8-step framework for implementing value pricing over the next 3 webinars. This was more of a foundational webinar to kind of prove the point that we need to reevaluate our business model. And so much of our business model is pricing. So I'm going to give you an 8-step process to help you price the customer, not the services. We have to move away from the idea that we're pricing services to pricing each and every customer separately. This is what hotels try and do. This is what airlines try and do. Even sports teams now are trying to price the customer. This is the movement that you see going on in the pricing world, is pricing the customer. We have an incredible advantage as professional firms. We meet with every single customer one at a time. That's an incredible advantage to, say, an airline that can't meet with every single customer to determine why they're flying on their plane. You know, why am I flying to London? Is it for a vacation? Is it to earn money? Is somebody else paying my airfare? United would love to know the answers to those questions, but they don't call me up and ask me. They have to devise little rules, like how far away from the flight date is he purchasing his ticket? Is he laying over Saturday night? These are all clues as to whether or not I'm a business traveler or a leisure traveler. And if I'm a business traveler, you can bet I'm going to pay a lot more for that airfare, and rightfully so, because it's more valuable to me, right? It's not the same seat as the person sitting next to me. It depends on a whole host of things. So that's what we're trying to do, is price the customer, and that's what the next 3 webinars are designed to do, to walk you through these 8 steps and give you some strategies to do that. I will leave you with this. I started kind of with Peter Drucker. Let me end with him. Peter Drucker gave very sage advice. He said, don't solve problems, pursue opportunities. And that's a great point. If all you're doing in your business is spending your time solving problems, then the best that you do is you revert back to the status quo. You should spend more than half your time pursuing opportunities. Opportunities for better strategy, opportunities for better differentiation from your competitors, to decommoditize yourself. And yes, there are ways to decommoditize accounting services. That's what marketing is all about. And I think this is a really profound piece of advice, that we need to spend more time thinking and working on possibilities, working on tomorrow rather than being attached to yesterday. And I tried to answer as many questions as I could going through these. I know we've got some in here I probably missed, but let me just leave you with one other set of resources. These are the next webinars that we're going to do. Part 2 of this series is day after tomorrow, which is having the value conversation. Part 3 is next Tuesday. We're going to be talking about pricing the customer, not the services. And then part 4 is developing and pricing options. And this will basically encompass the 8 steps that I'm talking about. This is where you can register for these programs. And folks, this is how you can find me. I'm happy to take email questions for you, or even if you want to call me. I do travel a lot, so calling may be a little bit slower than email, but this is all my information. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. I also do a radio show called The Soul of Enterprise every Friday at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. You can also get that on demand. It's on voiceamerica.com. You can find it on my website at verisage.com/TSOE. It's full of shows that deal with the knowledge economy. So pricing and intellectual capital and some of these other topics I talked about are dealt with on the show. These are also the 5 books, and if you wanted the book that coincided with this webinar series, it would be the one on the far right. That's my latest book, Implementing Value Pricing. That's the book that walks you through the 8 steps and also has lots of case studies from firms that have actually made the transition. And I'll leave you with one final thought before I turn it back over to Donna. The transition I'm talking about is changing your business model. It's not just changing your pricing. I'm talking about eliminating your billable hours and eliminating your timesheet. And the timesheet has to go as well, because I believe the timesheet is what keeps us from being professional, from focusing on the outcome. And I think it's the timesheet that keeps us mired in the mentality that we sell time. Thousands of professional firms of all sizes have eliminated both the billable hour and the timesheet around the world. Thousands. It can be done. It's an empirical fact. And that's what the ultimate goal here is, because I think if you do that, then you'll set yourself up to pursue a better business model that's far more profitable, not only for you, but more importantly, for your customers. And with that, I want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending today, and I look forward to our program the day after tomorrow. And Donna, if you want to take it back, or however you want to close it out.
Well, thank you very much, Ron. This was fantastic, and we're getting lots of great comments from everybody. I do want to let you know that you can go up to the top nav that says File and Save Questions Log or Save Chat Log. I'm not sure how it is when on your side of things, but then you can actually save. I tried to quickly type in all of the answers to the questions that Ron was addressing, so you can see that history there. And he did provide his email address, ron@verasage.com, and we thank you for attending today, and that's it.
Excellent. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.